Hello and welcome to this live stream panel discussion, Why Bother with EdTech, at the GESS EdTech Virtual Summit Dubai. Thank you all for tuning in today. There's just one slight change to the programme lineup I'd like to draw your attention to. Priya Lakhani is unfortunately unable to join us today, but luckily her colleague Charles Wood, Head of International at Century Tech, will be more than capably replacing her on the panel. Just a few small bits of information for you before we get underway. For anyone that hasn't joined us already today, you'll see a small chat panel on the right-hand side of your event platform. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in there. These are being moderated, so please just allow for a slight delay for anything to display on the platform. We'll do our best to get through these at the end, but if we don't manage to do it during the talk, these are saved in the system and we'll get back to you after the event. Within the virtual conference room itself, there's a panel where any polls or handouts might be showing. We'll let you know if these are available. If you want to see this session again at the end, we'll be uploading the recordings to the event platform as well as our GESS Education YouTube channel. We're on social media during the event, so if you'd like to share the sessions you're enjoying, please do follow and tag us at GESS Education using the hashtag GESSEdTech. But I think that's more than enough from me. This is, of course, an extra special panel discussion here at the GESS EdTech Summit, as it's also the latest episode of Learn Live UEA. So I'll now hand over to Olly, who'll introduce the rest of his wonderful panel. Enjoy the session.
Thank you so much for that glowing introduction there, Barney, and thank you for joining us and welcome to the latest episode of Learn Live UAE. A big thank you to the ongoing support from GESS Education, as well as all of the other presenters and educators from across the region that have not only joined us for this panel discussion, but joined all of the other panel discussions at the GESS EdTech Virtual Summit this year. It's a really strong hallmark, I think, of the vision and values of educators across the region in the Middle East, that their willingness to open doors and share their learning, their experience with each other for the betterment of the students in our classroom. So I think it's a fantastic place to be in terms of education, and it's fantastic to grow and share with educators across the region. The title of our Learn Live UAE discussion today with our distinguished panelists is Why Bother with EdTech? And I think this is a really timely statement to make and a really important discussion to have. We've got an array of educators on our panel who have a really rich experience of using and not using technology, and I think that's really important when considering balances and checks in our school. So I'm really looking forward to co-chairing this discussion with Mark. It was great to see your keynote earlier, Mark, and I'd just like to say massive thank you for the shout outs to the show. And, I speak for many educators in the region when I say that we truly stand on your shoulder as well for all of your sharing across the region. So thank you. I hand over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Olly. It's very kind of you. Right back at you. It's a lovely symbiotic relationship that we have, and it's a real privilege to work with you on this project. Thank you to Sasha, Nigel, Nathan, and Charles for joining us on this panel today. Working in that order, so Sasha, Nigel, Nathan, then Charles. Could you please introduce yourself and let the viewers know your current role in school, and then just give a brief synopsis of your journey in education thus far, if that's okay with you, starting with you, Sasha.
Hi, so I'm Sasha Crabb. I'm founding principal of Victory Heights Primary School, which is located in Sports City. So had the pleasure of helping to design the building, the logo, the uniform, all of the details from what we like to call our journey from sand to stardust. We've got about 809 children, mostly British. We have about 4 or 5 Emirati families, then a real international mix. We have children from FS1 up to year 6, and now because our brand has been proven, are sort of invested in happiness, serious about learning, our kids get into all of the secondary schools. Really, I kind of Hogwarts hats fit them. They off to DC or DESC or GESS, etc. when they leave here. We're a sort of, a lot of people say that we feel like a non-for-profit, although I don't really know what non-for-profit means anymore, because I don't think anybody is, but we are able to make a lot of decisions on the ground because we don't have a head office. So in terms of like staff recruitment, I've been very lucky to have a chemical engineer who's our STEAM teacher. One of our assistant heads is secondary trained, Ben Rothwell, who's done a lot with our journey into sort of EdTech. And so we've been very creative, very innovative from where we are today, and just, very passionate about being purposeful about what we do, and very proud of the wonderful children that we've got, but also the staff who put a lot into our school and have, themselves seen the impact of making good decisions, especially about being smart. And we're known for a school that is very passionate about workload. So that's a little bit about us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sasha. And I can echo that in conversations I've had with your colleague you mentioned there, Ben Rothwell, who's been a guest on the show before as well. Always come across with really sort of passionate but sort of research-informed and purposeful sort of approaches to education. So brilliant to have you on board with us today. Thank you for that lovely sort of summary there. Thank you. Over to you, Nigel.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. I'll echo that as well, Mark. I visited Sasha's school. It's a beautiful school and with great staff. So myself, I've been teaching since 1995, so a little bit of a dinosaur. Started teaching in a classroom in Norwich. I'm a geography teacher, and my first classroom had rollerblade chalkboards. So for the first 2 years of my teaching life, I used chalk. So we have come on. There is no doubt about it. I taught in secondary schools in the UK for 17 years, from geography teacher up to deputy head teacher, and then moved across to Abu Dhabi 7 years ago. And I've been the deputy head of the British school Al Khabairat in Abu Dhabi for the last 4 years. We are definitely a not-for-profit school, and it's a beautiful school. We've been through a huge journey from the stage 4 years ago where we had what was pretty tantamount to no EdTech at all, apart from some wired PCs, to now we're a Google school with one-to-one Chromebooks from year 5 to year 11, then a bring your own device strategy for sixth form. And we're not the finished article yet, but we are in a tremendous place right now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I remember the sort of introductions of whiteboards, and a whiteboard marker image is transformational. It was so much easier than writing with chalk. I remember it very well myself. Thank you so much for sharing about your journey there, Nigel. Nathan, how about yourself?
Hi there, everybody. I was just trying to work out with Nigel teaching in Norwich in the mid-90s. I think I was at primary school just outside of Norwich during that time. So, Nigel, we might have been very close in Norfolk. Hi, everyone. My name's Nathan Sadler. I'm the primary principal at GEMS Wellington Academy. The school is in its 10th year of opening, and I was one of the founding teachers when it opened back in 2011. Nice story for you. My wife, who is now my wife, was sitting on the seat next to me moving out to the school as well. So since then, married, 3 very young children. WSO has been such a big part of my career because I, to be honest, only taught for 2 years in the UK before moving out here. And in terms of my leadership journey, starting as a class teacher, moving out here, I've held various roles, including curriculum coordinators, head of year, assistant principal down in the lower year groups for Key Stage 1, 3 years as a vice principal as part of our executive leadership team. And it's during those 3 years that one of my roles was innovation lead, assessment, teaching and learning standards. And it's during that sort of time that, for me personally, in terms of my professional development, collaborating with people like Ben, who we've spoken about a few times, and other people across the UAE, that it's really sort of pushed me into the position and the role that I'm in right now, which is my first year as a principal during a global pandemic, which has been extremely interesting. Technology for me, whereas I'm not the biggest expert in any way whatsoever, I make sure I surround myself with people who are that. We're a Microsoft Showcase school, but in our primary section, we are a bring your own iPad, which we changed from bring your own device to bring your own iPad for that consistency. We have one of our digital leads as an Apple Distinguished Educator. So we do sort of combine Microsoft with Apple hardware to ensure we've got that consistent approach for our children moving forward. again, like Nigel said, we're not the finished article, but I do think that everything that's happened in the last sort of year has actually accelerated quite quickly the journey that we were hoping to get to, which is one positive to take from it. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nathan. And I like the fact that both yourself and Nigel have picked up that thing on not being the finished article, because this is more of a rhetorical question than anything else. But are we ever actually the finished article? You know, Dylan Willem talks about how teaching is such a difficult job. Can we ever actually become experts in it? That sort of thinking. It is a very, very difficult job indeed. But thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, Nathan, and really appreciate you joining us on the panel today. Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be here. So I'm coming from a slightly different angle. I've worked in education for coming up to 10 years, but always on the business side of things. That started in Hong Kong, where I founded and ran learning centers across Hong Kong and Macau for 5 years. There were language centers, and I was always really intrigued at how we could scale good practices, and that led me to looking at technology. I ended up working for the American Youth Literacy Foundation in America, helping develop a new phonemic alphabet that was housed on a mobile application and was funded by the Bush Foundation to try and tackle adult literacy within the US. And I ended up in London at a conference and happened to meet our wonderful founder, CEO, Priya Lakhani, and joined Century Tech, where I've grown the international business into 44 countries around the world over the past 3 years. So really keen on technology, obviously. I'm really passionate about education in lots of different forms. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Charles. That's really, I've known you for some time now, but I wasn't aware of that journey, particularly around Hong Kong and your work over there as well across the island. So brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing all of that and introducing all of yourselves onto the panel today. Thank you again so much for joining us. Let's start diving into some of these nitty-gritty questions, though, shall we? Olly, over to you.
Sounds like a great idea, yeah. So the first question that we've got is where some people might have the statement, why bother with EdTech? Could you please share an example of where educational technology has made a real difference or helped in your school? If we go in reverse order to how we went last time, so we go with, start with Charles, move down to Nathan, then Nigel, then Sasha, please.
So yeah, I guess I can talk about my experience I've visited hundreds of schools around the world, and seeing what I've seen. We used to run a lot of what we used to call AI classes, so where we'd introduce our technology into a classroom setting, and we'd actually teach using the technology, looking at sort of flipped and blended learning approaches. And I remember being actually in a school in Abu Dhabi, and I was warned before going into that class that there were some students there who had special educational needs. There were some students who had ASD and some dyslexic students. I was warned that going into that classroom that they might not be responsive to the lesson that I was about to deliver, and just to be warned of it. And I was really surprised when actually students were able to find their own confidence and independence in using a piece of tech that wasn't necessarily linked to sort of the social elements of the classroom, which we know some students aren't as receptive to as others. And they actually found that little element or little niche where they really were able to thrive within a learning environment. And so that element of, I guess, of inclusivity, of including all in learning and giving students their own footing, allowing them to learn at their own pace, progress at their own levels, I think is a hugely powerful way that technology can support learners. And it was a little girl in that classroom in Abu Dhabi who suffered from ASD, who came up to me at the end with her support assistant and said to me, "Thank you so much for this. This is going to change the way that I learn." And for me, it's those little moments and that really make what you do mean something. And I think that's what educational technology can do and has the power to be able to do.
Thanks, Charles. It's a really, really nice message there as well, that technology can, students can rise to the challenge when it comes to using technology, and we shouldn't write them off before we start. Nathan, coming through to yourself next.
Sure, yeah. I think going back to when I mean, I'm talking about early in my career with teaching, where I would say that technology was an add-on. We've said it before, heard it before, quite gimmicky and all of that. For me, the biggest shift and change was about 5-6 years ago at our school, when Seesaw was being spoken about a lot in terms of the way that you can use that innovatively within the classroom. Now, we had lots of trials in terms of how we were going to potentially implement it. And that was the biggest one for us at that moment in time, which has stuck, because as we know, with lots of different things, they come and go. But using Seesaw in primary really changed the way we did a lot of things, the way we communicated, so as a communication tool, the way that we connected between all stakeholders, with teachers, students, and parents all together, and just making that learning not stop at the school gates, making it be at home, making children seeing it as a place that they can connect and collaborate outside of school, like I've just said. That in turn needs the hardware to come with it, and where we had our bring your own device, and we're lucky to have iPads in the school where the children could connect and use it. Just every single year it's progressed. We've utilized it further. We've kept our parent community extremely happy, because it's not using 3-4 different pieces of software that they like the fact that we're being consistent and involve them on the journey as well. So to where we were 5 years ago of starting that to where we are now, and I know we're going to come on to COVID related and how what things that we've used during that time, it just really put us in a strong position to go into lockdown all those months ago. And since then, just sort of skyrocketed with the way that we continue to use it.
I think that's a really important point you've raised there. It's about having that solid foundation to build from, and consistency is key. And right at the start of that, that's how you've got to begin with that, and clear communication channels and raising the proficiency amongst your team is a vital aspect to that. Nigel, coming to you next.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Certainly about the consistency. If I start within the classroom, it's I think that consistency of platform is really important. And I know that our primary school also uses Seesaw up until year 5, and then they swap, and when they get the Chromebooks, they move over to Google Classroom. And that's what we've been using for the last 3 years. And what that can do in terms of communication and learning dialogues between students and staff, and the continual development in their learning has been astonishing. And the add-ons that go on with Google Classroom are really what makes it and makes it sort of fly. But that consistent approach of using Google Classroom as their go-to, and the mark sheets that are in there, the grade sheets that are in there as well, that's been phenomenal over the last 3 years. But I just also want to touch upon something that I think's really impacted the teaching profession. Again, if I reflect back onto, thank you, Nathan, all those years ago when I started in Norwich, where I started from with paper registers, with green slips for lates, with yellow bits of paper for something. I can't uniform, red bits of paper for behaviour, and green and pink bits of behaviour for positives, and all these things disappeared into a filing cabinet somewhere. And the ability now you've got with the much maligned management information systems, no matter which one we use, they're all in some ways rubbish, but also they all in some ways work. And what they've done is they've allowed real time-saving facilities for teachers to concentrate on teaching, and I think those sorts of things have really improved the ability for teachers to do the one thing that we love doing, and that's teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important. Remembering your core purpose is the students and their learning, and everything that you do revolving around technology has to come back to that. So it's a great message there, Nigel. And I remember at the start of my teaching career, also the slips. So it's nice to not have to use those anymore. Sasha, coming to you then on that same question.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen is about tech that has really helped our community and in terms of growing is the collaboration aspect of it. You've all touched on a lot about the learning, but if I talk about the teachers, for example, and the professional development opportunities about connecting, that's been a huge time saver. Like I said, we're very passionate about workload and just looking at action research, or where can we find, from a school that needs to watch professional development budgets, where can we have a purposeful impact? So utilising sort of Twitter as a forum to be able to sort of tell our story, but also pick up on what's effective. For example, at the moment, this is having a huge effect on our professional development because we've sort of action research looked at the stories that other schools have used. So the walkthroughs, the whole Tom Sherrington approach that we've connected with other schools and used that as a professional development tool, I can measure as a principal and a leader is having impact, cost effective. I'm not just sending people off to a course which we can't do anymore to have a nice sandwich in a hotel, but it means then I can use those resources if I need to get a supply teacher in, for example, rather than a course that's going to have purposeful impact. I think also teachers have really valued the fact that we can give them research projects, etc., which are tailor-made to their own professional development. So it's not a case of herding everybody in for a staff meeting and then them all hearing the same thing. They can choose. And even now, post-COVID, we've got different Zoom groups where teachers are working together on something that is really going to have an impact on their classroom. So again, sharing strategies and just basically connecting with other people around has been really useful for us from a professional development point of view. And also probably a little bit like Nigel said in terms of the communications within school, like Slack, for example, that Ben introduced for us as school, rather than having the notes and everything and who's seen where the dean's equipment is. That doesn't need to, people need to run around and find it. It's a quick message. We've got instant accessibility to resources. There's different channels on there for different year groups. It again makes time quite effective. It's also got teaching tips. It has daily communication board of who's in, who's out. And it's also reduced massively the email workload. So, email workload, that's something official. But that channel is just, let's connect with everybody and in terms of how to operationally run by saving people running around or, having paper notes. So that kind of practical operation side from a leadership point of view and sort of galvanizing everybody together, especially at a time like this, I don't know how we would have pigeonholes anymore, Nigel, with a note in it. I don't know how we do that. How can we ever find out?
That's a brilliant response, Sasha. Thank you very much. And what I like about it, and Nigel's response there as well, lots of people share, and don't get me wrong, using technology for sort of pedagogical, impactful teaching for learning approaches is super important. But what you've both sort of picked up on there is how technology can also really benefit on efficiency levels, things that you can do to reduce paperwork, to help make workload easier. Mentioning Slack there, then Sasha, Slack's a fantastic tool. The integrations, for example, there, I suspect you're using linking through into Google Drive and the ease of sharing of files within there, and making it a much more slick environment for all that sort of sharing must, as you say, bring many benefits. Jumping back onto the teaching and learning sort of question though, and I'll go back into reverse order. So straight onto you with this one, Sasha, please. Can you give us an example of how technology supported teaching and learning prior to COVID? Before COVID, and then we'll work through to Nigel, then Nathan, then Charles, please.
Prior to COVID?
Prior to COVID, yeah.
Was there a world prior to COVID? I remember what normal
many
was.
moons ago.
I can remember just before, it was February, I think, when I was actually last in Dubai. So, any sort of prior to COVID things. Obviously, COVID's actually been, it is adversity, but it's brought opportunity, hasn't it? One of the biggest issues, and we've heard, Steve Banbury in his presentation previous to this panel was talking about how the pandemic has actually helped to improve teacher confidence with using technology, and I'm sure you've seen that developing in all of your schools. It's often been a barrier, but were there any sort of stories you could share prior to COVID about how technology was being used well within Victory Heights?
In terms of, like assessment for learning, all of those sort of Kahoot, Quizlet things that were able to help with instant feedback to the children within the classroom, and that kind of hook of magic, using those different, the different graphics and the awe and wonder of the made up sort of BBC stories of the, the dragons were here last night and the dinosaurs have been stampeding across, what we're going to do with these footprints. So definitely always, as a hook, and I think like Charles picked up on it, just that kind of collaboration where children can use Google Classroom to collaborate across different rooms with their own personalities and their own needs. And we did see a lot of children utilizing with our kind of passion for inclusion of sort of that flipped classroom, and helping to kind of access things at their own level, so that they don't have to be the showy performer, but also quietly working at their level and then confidently speaking rather than having that blank page in terms of our Chromebooks and recording. So yeah, definitely from a modification and a hook perspective, I think pre-COVID, that was something. I mean, I'd often be sat around school or something and a really shy child was thinking, who are they talking to? But they were very comfortable about speaking to a camera, and obviously, they were using their genius time to kind of like work in different workspaces. So definitely from a modification point of view, helping all abilities, I'd say that that's something that the children, really thrived and looked forward to, being able to be the best that they can be, but with purpose.
Brilliant, thank you, Sasha. And I love those examples, using tools like the X-ray goggles in Mozilla Firefox, for example, to go onto the BBC News website, hack it a bit, and put your own news stories in, the dragon stuff there. I mean, those are fantastic examples of sort of bringing writing to life for young people. Thank you so much for sharing those examples there. Nigel, over to you.
Yeah, pre-COVID days, and I think one of the things about COVID, and it's one of the only things you can ever say about COVID, is that it sort of expedited people's experience and expertise and up in their skill set in terms of EdTech, in terms of education in the teaching profession. So there's one thing we can be grateful for in with COVID. Certainly prior to COVID, we were on a journey, as I said earlier, that started 4 years ago from pretty much zero, ground level. By the time that COVID hit, we had 6 months of, a year and 6 months of one-to-one Chromebooks and Google Classroom. And we got to a stage where everybody was using Google Classroom, but the next stumbling block was what they were doing was they were usually using Google Classroom for homework. So as they were doing their normal lessons, typically without the use of Google Classroom, and using it for a depository, and it was a great depository for resources, but they weren't possibly using it to its greatest extent. But we have started to use and work a lot on feedback and reflection. And what we asked our departments to do was to look at a feedback and reflection policy that worked for them in their department. And every department was different, because what worked well in maths didn't necessarily work well in humanities or in English. So we had different departments using different tools to provide feedback and then give students opportunities to reflect and improve their work. So we had the maths department using Kami, we had the English department, and most departments still using Google Docs and the comments section on Google Docs, and then reflection on there. And then we had modern languages using Kaizena and the audio and the video feedback that you can provide on there. So we got to a really good stage. But what we hadn't got to prior to COVID is sort of the upskilling of everyone to there. Everyone was sort of there, but some people were there. So what COVID's done is it's sort of expedited these ones up to here, which I'm grateful for.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think that sort of recognises the sort of purposeful approaches. You've not been talking about the technology being the star there. It's about being mindful of subject specialisms, things that are relevant to specific subject areas, and then thinking about how that can enhance. And it reminds me of a quote from an old colleague of mine, Zoe Elder, who incidentally wrote Full On Learning. And when I was working with her, she sort of really pushed this idea that technology should be there to enhance the learning, not dictate the learning. And I really think you sort of reinforce that sort of message in the things you've shared there. Thank you so much, Nigel.
I'll just say, Mark, sorry, our digital strategy tagline, which is digital technology and education, is only used to advance and enhance learning. And you've hit the nail on the head there, because it is all about the learning, and it's about how it can be used purely to advance and enhance learning. If it's there just to entertain, it's not necessarily the right thing to do.
No, I completely concur on that. From my perspective, if teachers use technology for gimmicky reasons, it devalues not just your subject, but you as a teacher. And if you're looking to get engagement in and a passion for your subject, you don't want to be known as that teacher who just does those sort of flash in the pan lessons. Why would you want to do that? I don't understand it, quite frankly. But no, that's great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing, Nigel. Thank you. Nathan, over to you.
Yeah, very similar to what Sasha and Nigel have already said there. Just a couple of extra things to add on to it. Where it wasn't consistent in terms of where our teaching, what it looked like in terms of using technology, I would say that we were getting to a place where the outcome or the output of what children, how they were showing their learning, it was getting really exciting as to the choice that they had in that. And Sasha said about modification of learning or personalizing, agency choice, whatever you want to call it. Children that were being assessed on a poetry objective, for example, where traditionally they still would have had to write down what personification looks like, but that's not what they were being assessed against. They were being assessed against their ability to personify and come up with those phrases. And by using technology, whether it's the iPads they were bringing in or whatever they chose to do, they were able to show their learning and display their learning in a way that was comfortable for them. So if writing was difficult for them to do, to be able to construct sentences, and that's not what was being looked at, they could do an audio of it, they could do a video, they could blog it so that parents could see it, they could do it as a seesaw post. And for us as a school, we were getting to a place where we were okay with that not all being in the English book or in the exercise books, which traditionally they used to be in. And then other things that when I was sort of thinking about this question, tools like immersive reader, again, without having that, some of our children, giving them large bits of text, and again, you're not assessing their ability to read. You want them to be able to comprehend or to add their thoughts onto something. If you don't want them to decode every single word, then immersive reader is the thing that can support them. And it just allowed other children you could just see an engagement, a positivity about learning that maybe they didn't have prior to that. So all of these small things, I mean, it's all evidence to say why it's not a fad EdTech, it's not an add-on, it's here because it's going to help our children in the future.
Brilliant messages. Thank you very much indeed. Charles, could you add your perspectives, please?
Yeah, sure. So we always, I guess as a company, we always think about what tools can we build to enhance teaching and to support teaching and learning. And I think we can all agree here that as teachers, you can have the best lesson plan in the world. And then you go into that lesson and one tiny thing can scupper the entire lesson and it's out the window and you have to think on your feet and be agile and approach it from a different angle. And we have 15 or 16 former teachers in our company, and working with them, I think one thing we can definitely say about them is they are agile folk. They can think on their feet and they can change and adapt in incredible ways. It's something I really admire about the teaching profession. And this led us to think about this idea of, well, how can we support teaching agility even further through the use of technology? And so we look at things, and I've noticed things like automated question level analysis or intervention graphs, which give teachers live data to say, this child over there is really struggling with this concept, or there's a glaring misconception with 2/3 of your class quickly, you can address it now. And it's building on this idea of trying to close down feedback loops and give more timely, targeted feedback to students. And so I've seen that a lot, particularly in the UAE. I know there's conversation, everyone's in the UAE. And I've always admired spaces that I've seen in schools. I remember GESS have some sort of a Jeep or a part of a plane in one of their year 3 spaces, and children are kind of exploring things through those setups that they have there. And another person I thought of when this question was asked was Andy Price at Ranchers Primary, and I think Andy is possibly the king of the carousel model, or the station rotation model, whatever you want to call it. And that idea of having different settings or different stations for children to first explore a concept and then apply that knowledge and then be assessed. And then, there's lots of things you can do with technology in order to create these experiences for students. I think I've experienced that in the UAE well before COVID hit. So I can only imagine how it's been enhanced further over the past 9 months, and the deep dives that schools have done into technology.
Great response. Thank you very much indeed, Charles. Next question, over to you, Olly.
I'm just mindful of the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to merge 2 questions together. So could you each give us an example of a specific example of how technology has changed your working practices during COVID, and what technology do you think will be here to stay after COVID, and why? If we go first to Nathan, and then to Nigel, and then to Sasha, and then Charles, please.
Sure. Yeah. One of the biggest changes that we've had is we're no longer using exercise books for each subject. And I think part of that's to do with the fact that we're not supposed to transfer paper to one another with the RKHGA regulations. But it's something that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we set out that we wanted to achieve anyway. There was a few years ago, I visited Steve Banbury at GESS, about 3 years ago, and they were on about no lost learning and going on to OneNote. And it was very much, we set ourselves as a school a journey that we wanted to go on. And we probably saw this coming 2 years later than what it has now, but it's been forced upon us. And Nigel touched on that earlier. We don't have exercise books. The children are documenting all of their learning, whether it's on OneNote in predominantly secondary, but also our year 5s and 6s and through Seesaw. And everything is in one place. The children can now integrate their curriculum. They're not talking about when do I have English, when do I have maths. They're seeing the links between their learning, which is really, really positive. The second part of that question comes away from teaching and learning a little bit, maybe, with technology, what will be here to stay. I know many schools, and ourselves included, we've really communicated with our parents, probably more than we ever have done, through ways of digital technologies. And the way that we're having video conferencing calls for parent consultations, meeting the parent, meet the teacher, with the uptake that we've had on them, where parents don't have to come to the school and complain about the parking maybe outside or during busy times. Mums, dads, working, not working, can log in together at the same time. And there's just been some lovely conversations where probably couldn't have happened in prior to COVID for those reasons. So as a technological tool that we're using, I'd definitely say that's something that won't go away. And I was thinking about this question earlier about what's here to stay. And I think you could also argue nothing's here to stay, because it keeps changing and evolving. And what we think is working for us now, brilliant. But in 5 years' time, let's have that question again in terms of what it does look like. But it's exciting. That's what we do know.
It is, yeah. It's been great to see the response from lots of different technology companies to the needs of what educators are saying. They're like, I need your product to actually enable me to do this. So that's been really useful. And when Mark and I were sort of talking about what questions to ask you guys, that was the first thing that came into my head. What's here to stay? And in terms of parent consultations, it's such a useful tool. It's a great example that you've given there of technology as a utility to enable that communication conversation with the stakeholders that are really, really important. Nigel, coming to yourself next, please.
Yeah, Nathan covered many things that I'm thinking about, and just certainly in terms of the parents' evening, we are literally in the middle of a year 12 and 13 parents' evening right now at BZAC. So it's all online. I think Plato said necessity is the mother of invention, and that's exactly what we're doing, isn't it? Now we're trying to work out how we best provide a service for our students in these crazy times. So I'm not going to repeat everything that Nathan said, but in terms of some of the add-ons that we're using in terms of helping teaching and learning that haven't been mentioned yet, I'll just mention some of them that our staff are using. As I said earlier, we apart from the vehicle of Google Classroom, we don't dictate to our departments what they use. We suggest, and we have a library with an explanation of what they do, and Rob Wakeling, who's our secondary digital leader, puts together videos of how to use them, and then people decide what works best for them. But there's things like so Pear Deck has been a big favorite in terms of retrieval practice, quizzes, and that links directly to Google Classroom. So again, it's a time saver because the results come in to Google Classroom. Seneca and GCSE Pod are revision tools and work their way through not just learning but also assessment. Mentimeter, which allows huge amounts of collaboration in class and is really good fun. Edpuzzle is a massive favourite at the moment because of the fact that the students can't skip a video; they've got to watch it. And you can see their progress as they go, and again that links back into Google Classroom. So that's a terrific a new app that we've been using, or new add-on that we've been using. In terms of what I think will stay post-COVID, also I think I agree totally with Nathan. We're going to have to see how many of these. They won't all last the test of time, that's for sure. But I strangely feel that potentially hybrid learning might. I think that in international schooling, in particular the for-profit international schooling system that most people live in, there's an opportunity for schools to run this system. They can show that it's challenging for teachers. It's very challenging, but it can work. And I think there are schools that are going to take opportunities from that. That's for sure. So yeah, we live in an exciting time. The one thing I really just want to see is students without a mask on, so that we can see their smiling faces again. That's what I'm really looking forward to post-COVID.
I think that everyone's smile and nods at the end there is verification that we're all hugely keen to see that again in a classroom near us. So I massively agree with you there, Nigel. It's really nice to hear your approach that not everything works for everybody. So it's teacher discretion and choice, because they're the people that know the students best. Sasha, anything to add on the points that we've already had raised, and anything specific to Victory Heights?
Yeah, due to our sort of physical size of our rooms, and we've got quite a few different sort of spillover classrooms. So we might have, for example, had 4 year 3 classrooms, but actually now we can only get 16 children in. So we've got them spread out around, which meant that they went into specialist spaces. So we're using the sort of SOUL method, the self-organized learning environment, so that the children have had to be very resilient and have had to be very independent. Obviously, we're a primary school, to choose a lot of those specialist subjects that they wouldn't be having live teaching from. So, you know, music, and also our music teacher is actually pregnant, and so is having to deliver. So the way that some of the specialist teachers are delivering their sessions has had to still be in that kind of blend, because we literally physically can't move everybody around, because those rooms, all the teachers, etc., in order to sort of be compliant with protocols. So that's been, I'm not saying that that's perfect, because obviously a year 3 child sort of, you know, with their headphones on doing a Spanish lesson might, you know, nothing beats that face to face, but it has made the children have to be organised in terms of, you know, concentrating and being sort of focused, and obviously we're trying to look at workload and sort of planning and preparation time. So we needed to give our teachers some sort of, relaxed time or some sort of downtime whilst they couldn't leave the classroom, because there's not 5 live Arabic lessons, for example, within our school. So it's definitely been a good way to kind of keep that richness of the curriculum going, and also it's actually shown the children's real interests, because they're, some of them might not even click onto that, but they've almost chosen their GCSEs when they're 8 or 9, because they're really, they're sort of really accessing that specialist lesson. So that, I can't say I've got a definitive answer for that, but that's quite interesting from a primary perspective, that they kind of narrowed down there. I think definitely the collaboration approach, like I keep going on about in terms of across Dubai, and I was mentioning it to Mark that obviously here in Dubai we've got a lot of Arabic sort of areas for us all to develop. So we've been looking at moderation of work across Dubai. So again, it's not happened yet, but teachers from year 6 looking at progress and attainment are putting in to a sort of Google thing. I don't know what the thing is, but I just asked it to happen. Have put in some reading and writing examples so that we can actually audit across Dubai those schools that wouldn't want to take part, to look at, okay, these are Arabic standards. So we can then, should we have a visitor, say, okay, well, our children are working or attaining and progressing at this level. So that collaboration, because that, like you said, Nathan saying about the car parking and getting everybody together at the end of the day, that's difficult. But obviously if they can go straight into a Zoom and then they've got to upload some documents, that's sort of, again, the time aspect of it. I definitely agree with the parents' evening, although as a parent I got clicked off after 5 minutes and I hadn't finished, so I was I was like, why has he gone?
Was your finger wagging at that time?
Right next to my son, and he's like rolling his eyes, so that was quite handy, because we had to look like we liked each other for 5 minutes. But that's definitely those sort of practical elements. So what was the other thing I was going to say? And obviously just the whole kind of like data stuff with the lesson observations and looking at how to work smarter, which, when we're doing these walkthroughs at the moment, we've had to narrow it down to absolute. So what's the bread and butter that we want to see across the school, and using that from a tech point of view of being able to put your finger on what's our school's why instantly is there from a fact. I mean, obviously it still matters who's putting the information in, and that to me will never take away from sort of that conversation. But if I need to put my hands on why are we doing this, because there's an issue, we can see that's something that we're really strong at as a school, and this is all evidence because of conversations or walkthroughs, then we can make as a leadership team a quick informed decision, or I can run to the board and go, okay, right, well, this particular app, etc., or this bit of technology is having such an impact, we need to continue with it. So having that evidence, which to back up a decision instantly, is that it's not an opinion, it's a purpose. So that is definitely something we would continue to. Sorry, that was a waffle.
No, absolutely not, Sasha. And actually, it relates to. I'm going to go off script a bit here, because we've had a question from the audience, which sort of correlates to one of the things you were talking about there, Sasha. And the question says, noting that oftentimes a school has many subscriptions or tools at their disposal, how do you, and I'm guessing in brackets as a school leader, evaluate and keep track of the usefulness of the EdTech you have purchased? And could you share some best practices or tips for managing the assets and keeping them used by teachers as well? Is there anybody on the panel who think they could respond to that question?
I'll just quickly butt in. We do that in terms of being cost effective and looking at impact, and again, why. So again, running surveys, asking the children, asking the teachers, and asking the parents. So if, for example, if it's Arabic that we're using in Arabic, or it's Education City, etc., or it comes up to ordering, I don't want to waste money. It's something that I could be, could end up being, well utilised. So I think getting the children's point of view as well of has that made an impact is important. But yeah, we look at it annually, really, I would say. And also, I'm not very good with my time getting around school in terms of lesson observations and walkthroughs, but I always keep a grip on pupil progress. So if, for example, I'm holding a child's book and I can see a big piece of writing, and I can say, okay, is Nessie helping spelling, etc. here? And that's coming up consistently, then you can evaluate from that point of view. But yeah, I think it's constantly, you have to, otherwise you just hemorrhage manage. You have to keep looking at what's the output of it, and asking the different, and the kids as well, whether it helps or confuses, and does it make a difference? Again, it's always asking about your why, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anybody else want to sort of jump in about their approaches in relation to sort of keeping track of the impact and use of the various tools you have in your schools?
Yeah, I'm happy to add in there. I think with most subscriptions, even though they can come up at various times during the year, the majority are sort of September, October time, when obviously school started and we've started using a piece of software. I think it's important to have a centralized list of what all of those different things are. And our school is very big. We're over 3,000 children, lots of departments wanting software. And if you've got that centralized list, you know what the cost is. When it comes to focusing on your budget for the next academic year, it could be from above that you've got to reduce your budget anyway. So then you start going through that list and going, okay, so which ones are having the most impact? Exactly what Sasha just said. What's the why behind it? How do I know that's helping? And that's asking all of those stakeholders, again, that Sasha just said, to find out what people like and what that looks like and the impact of the children's learning. So we have a lot of conversations at the end of an academic year. And then when we're finalizing budget, sort of coming back to school in August, September time, that's when final decisions are made of what's made the cut and what hasn't.
Brilliant, thank you. Did you want to add anything to that as well, Nigel or Charles?
Just, sorry, Charles. Just the the fact that the efficacy of anything that you start using in school is often directly proportional to the professional learning that you put into it and the upskilling of the staff who are using it. So if you want something to be effective, you've got to think hard about how it's being introduced and the continual professional development of your staff alongside their use of that tool.
No, I completely agree. Charles, did you want to add into that as well? Thank you,
Well,
Nigel.
I think talking to a lot of schools, people have different benchmarks and different ways of measuring what is impact, and that impact could be qualitative. It could be, as Sasha described, talking to children and finding out whether they enjoy it. It's quite a qualitative bit of evidence, and if they do, then great. That's something which they're engaged with. The other type of evidence is quantitative. So how is this actually impacting learning? Can we benchmark the use of this technology against progress data or other type of data we're collecting? Can we actually find a correlation between the two? I always think that's very tricky to do because there are so many variables involved, one of the biggest variable being the teacher and how they use and deploy that technology, and that's very, very difficult to measure. But actually maybe thinking it from a business perspective, and drawing a bit on Nigel's comments around upskilling, professional development, and crucially strategy, is that you never deploy a bit of technology and suddenly expect for it to start doing wonders a couple of months later. There has to be a very clear strategy of how are we implementing this and how are we upskilling alongside. If I think of a business as a business, if we introduce a new CRM, which is a sales tool, very expensive sales software that you put into your business to track and monitor prospects, we wouldn't implement that and then expect it to suddenly increase our sales by 100% in a couple of months' time. We come up with a 3-year strategy. How are we going to really implement this? We've done our research around the type of software that it is. We're happy with the evidence that they presented. We're now going to implement it, and we're going to come up with our own benchmarks and milestones to make sure that it is impacting our processes within the organization. So that's how we'd approach it as a business.
No, that's brilliant. And what I like about that, I mean, CRM, customer relationship management tool, it's really, really good. There's a tool you can use in education. Net Support DNA does track how often various licenses of different products you've purchased are being used in your organization. But it's lovely to have access to that sort of information. But what's really sort of been sort of shone through in your responses, actually, it's not just about the usage, it's about the impact of that usage and how it's being used to actually support the sort of day-to-day efforts of teaching and learning across the board. And I loved your response, Nigel, as well, talking about the efficacy of not just the tool, but the way it's being used and the confidence of the teachers in your school using those things as well. Look, as you probably recognise with Barney now joining us, it is time to wrap things up. Don't worry, Barney, I did see your message on the side there, so I was about to do that anyway.
No worries.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining the session today. It's been a real honour to present Learn Live UAE from the GESS EdTech Virtual Summit today. I don't want to speak for Olly, but both of us are very, very pleased and proud to have been able to have conversations this afternoon with Sasha Crabb, head teacher of Victory Heights Primary School, and Nigel Davis, deputy head at BSAC, Nathan Sadler, head teacher at WSO, and Charles Wood from Century. Thank you all so much for joining us today and sharing your insights and experience. As always, not just for myself, but I'm sure others have been left inspired with your experiences and ideas as well. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. And last few words to you, Olly, please.
Just a huge thank you again to all of our panelists and to the GESS Education team for helping us to facilitate this episode live from the show, and look forward to catching more of presentations from this GESS EdTech Virtual Summit online. Loads of them are on demand, so please do dip in and watch those, and join us next Monday night for Learn Live UAE, 8 p.m. GST. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much, guys. Just a final word from me. Thank you all so much for your time. That was a brilliant discussion. Sorry I had to jump in and interrupt you there. Olly, Mark, thank you so much for bringing Learn Live UAE to the GESS EdTech Virtual Summit today. Just for our attendees, if you've got any questions for any of our panelists here, you can just search their names in the search bar at the top, drop them a message for any questions you've got. Alternatively, send us a message at marketing@guesseducation.com and we can pass those on for you. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed that session. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.